With a 10-14 record on the season, it's very clear that the Toronto Raptors need a change, and perhaps the easiest thing to switch up is simply the starting five. So, what adjustments can Darko Rajakovic make to his lineup to get the most out of the players on the court, if anything? Let's get into it. This is Amateur Hour Sports, the YouTube channel that is completely dedicated to providing you with Toronto Raptors coverage, whether it be in videos just like this for news coverage and analysis, or in live stream watch parties for every Raptors game. Subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with all that content, help me on the road to 16,000 subs, and smash that like button if you enjoyed this video along the way. Let's try to get this video to 150 likes, because today we're discussing the Toronto Raptors starting five, and if this is something that needs to be changed up. Now, we had that recent success against the Atlanta Hawks where the Raptors and their starters had an immense amount of success in that victory. A ton of points were scored by the Raptors. Once again, defensively, there's still going to be question marks here, but we will take the win where we can get it, ending the four-game losing streak, a 135-128 victory. But in particular, an area I was focused on was how the starting five would play together. Yes, in this game, the Raptors starting five were plus 14 in 22 minutes on the court together, but in the games leading up to this, in the 7 games leading up to this success over the Atlanta Hawks, the Toronto Raptors starters were minus 38 in 111 minutes together and had lost 6 of 7 games. And in all 6 of those losses, those Raptors starters were outscored. So in the last 8 games, the Raptors starters have been outscored 6 times. They've lost all 6 of those games. In the 2 games of those 8, the Raptors starters were not outscored. Well, go figure. The Raptors ended up winning the game. So there's been some difficulties with definitely the spacing with this team, and particularly spacing with the starting five. In the modern NBA, you really only want to have 2 non-shooters in your starting five. In fact, you probably only really want only 1 non-shooter in your starting five. But for the Toronto Raptors, things are very different. Dennis Schroeder is a non-shooting player. Yes, he can score like 33% of his three-pointers, but the respect he gets out there, he doesn't get covered on the outside, would deem he's a non-shooter. Pascal Siakam, despite going 5 of 6 from 3 against the Atlanta Hawks, that is a non-shooter and certainly has been under par as a whole on the season in terms of his three-point percentage. Jakob Poeltl straight up doesn't shoot, but OG Anunoby is definitely a shooter. What he lacks is maybe the movement shooting, but he's definitely a shooter that gives some space into his team. Scottie Barnes this season is certainly playing like a shooter, so we could consider him a shooter, but if you're being nice, the Raptors have 3 non-shooters in their starting five. If you're not being so nice, perhaps it's 4 if you include Scottie Barnes as a non-shooter, though that 3-ball game is coming along. Regardless, it's more than the 2. It's more than like the maximum 2 you should have with your starting five. So spacing has been the name of the game for the Raptors this season. When they have spacing, and they did in that recent win over the Atlanta Hawks, they find success because there's just so much more space on the inside for their top players, Pascal Siakam, Scottie Barnes, and even sometimes OG Anunoby to slash and get to the rim. When there's no shooting, teams can really bog down in the paint. They can restrict all of the space that we want to have to get to the rim, and the Raptors have no real answer for that. And we've seen so many frustrating games this season where the Raptors have no answer for teams who sit back in the paint when those shots are not falling. And for the majority of the season, those shots have not been falling. We shot above 50% from 3 against Atlanta, but that's not going to happen every game. And the reality is the Raptors, in terms of efficiency compared to the amount of attempts they're taking, are bottom of the NBA for three-pointers. So something definitely needs to be switched up here. Something definitely needs to be changed. And sir, Raptors fans, we're looking at this team thinking we need big changes. We need trades to happen. We need roster moves to happen to really get us excited about where this team is heading in the future. But for the time being, in the short term, what is a possible change we can make that can really elevate this team, possibly elevate this team? That could be the starting five. And many Raptors fans online are calling for a switch to the Raptors starting five. And leading into that Atlanta game, people were concerned about it going up against the likes of Trae Young and DeJounte Murray. Ultimately, the Raptors handled their business there, but before the game, Darko was asked about potential starting five switches, and he said that they need to give the starting five maybe another game or 2. This really pinched a nerve with a lot of Raptors fans because it's kind of like Masai Ujiri saying, well, this core needs another year or 2, when clearly we're seeing the deficiencies with the core. It's not really going to work. We'd like action now and not have wasted years of basketball. Well, in the same sort of vein for this one, Raptors fans, they want to see action right now. They want to see change to the starting five, and they don't want to see games wasted away. Now, fortunately, the game against the Hawks was not wasted away, but fans, like I said, you can be maybe a little bit excited about the fits and maybe perhaps a little bit excited that Darko switched up his bench schemes in that game didn't go to the exact same lineups in the first half as he did in the second half. Like in the second half, Scottie Barnes was not the first starter to get pulled out of the game for the bench players to come in. In fact, it was Anunoby and Schroeder who checked out of the game early on, mostly because he wanted to match up those minutes next to Trae Young, because Trae Young was nuclear in the first half. But at least there is some ability from Darko to make those adjustments and make that sort of change. And to be fair to him, as far as giving the starting five another 2 games here, we have to really consider who is going to be coming in off the bench, because we know the Raptors have a very poor bench. It's one of the worst benches in the NBA in terms of output. Now, in this stretch of games, honestly, the bench has not been the reason we've been losing games. Weirdly enough, it has been the starters losing games, but we've had our fair share of poor bench performances this season, and ultimately, I don't think there's one player on the bench, unfortunately, that I see come in the game that I'm like excited about. Okay, the game needs this guy right now. The game needs this player to come in. Like, this will be a good change for the Raptors to get going here. Nobody on the bench really gives me that sort of hope. Like, maybe sometimes Chris Boucher comes into the game and I go, okay, this is a player that can inject some energy to the team. Like, that's what we need right now. Or perhaps Gary Trent Jr. comes in, and I'm praying this is one of those games where Gary Trent Jr. can actually hit his wide open 3-pointers. So, considering the bench, who we have on the bench, and Darko, I'm going to give him credit, has finally gone with a 9-man rotation. He did that against the Hawks for like the first time this season. Hopefully, this is the first of many where we commit to our top 9 rather than extend the roster out to 10 players and extend the lineups out to 10 players. Malachi Flynn's coming off the bench, consistently the backup point guard. That's not going to change. Achua comes in as a backup big. Consistently, that's not going to change. Gary Trent Jr. comes into the game. That's obviously not going to change. And the fourth guy, at least for the time being, is Chris Boucher. Those are the 4 guys coming off the bench. So who can you realistically say should come into the starting 5 with the way they're playing this season? Like Achua, I don't know. I'm not ready to say Jakob Poeltl's coming out of the starting 5. And we've seen some amazing defensive performances from Jakob Poeltl and the presence that we have. Like, after all, like, we sold a lot at the previous trade deadline to get this guy, and we need to use him. He's a good player. I think he's been a bit unfairly criticized this season. He adjusted very well after a difficult first half against the Hawks defensively to be outstanding defensively in the second half. Had 2 key blocks on Trae Young floaters late in the game to help secure the Raptors' victory. Achua, we're not there yet. Malachi Flynn, in terms of coming in for Dennis Schroeder, just to balance out talent, have Schroeder come in off the bench to try and run the second unit. That doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. Like, fit-wise, I can see Malachi Flynn starting working just because, you know, he's going to do his role, he's going to do his job, and perhaps there's a bigger outside threat for Malachi Flynn on catch-and-shoot threes if they're going to leave him open that he can hit a little bit more than Dennis Schroeder. But Schroeder's shooting hasn't been bad enough where I'm, like, ready to go all out and say that. Malachi Flynn's shooting hasn't been good enough where I'm ready to go all out and say that. And certainly from a defensive standpoint, you need Dennis Schroeder in against the opposition's lead guard. So the big question about the starting 5 does come to Gary Trent Jr. Gary Trent Jr. is a floor spacer, and I've just highlighted the lack of floor spacing on this team. Gary Trent Jr. has consistently performed much better as a starter rather than off the bench, and that reigns true even for a game that he started earlier on this season. But the issue I have with this is, like, why are we rewarding Gary Trent here for the fact that he usually is better when he starts? Like, this is a grown man. This is a grown man in a contract year, a professional basketball player. Like, why are we rewarding this guy for the fact that, like, he can't score when he comes off the bench and nearly as consistently? You should be able to execute. You're making $18 million this season. You should be able to execute in the role that you're given. And he is given consistent minutes off the bench, but it's hard to keep him on the court when he's not shooting well, because when he's not shooting well, he has no bag in mid-range, no bag at the rim. He can't put pressure on the rim. He is a subpar defender. He doesn't rebound. He doesn't set up plays. Doesn't get rack up assists or anything. So when he's not hitting threes, it's tough to really play this guy. When he's hitting threes, he's an immensely important player for the team. He had 3 big ones in the second half against the Hawks to help secure the win. But overall in the season, it's been wildly inconsistent. But at this point for the Raptors, things are going so wrong. We see the constricted space with his starting 5. It's almost as if, like, what else can we do here? What else should we change here? Maybe just injecting a bit of floor spacing into the team is what we should do with this group. But if you're going to do that with Gary Trent, somebody has to come out of the starting 5. Poeltl, I've already said you shouldn't bring out of the starting 5, and it would be kind of crazy to have him coming off the bench. Siakam, Barnes, and Anunoby, like, come on. Those guys are really good. They're not coming off the bench. So the conversation shifts towards Dennis Schroeder. But I mean, you've seen the way Darko's been treating Dennis Schroeder this season. He is a big fan of Dennis Schroeder's game. Dennis Schroeder's usage is very high. Dennis Schroeder is taking on a ton of shots for this team. Is Darko ready to give up on Dennis Schroeder in his starting five after really committing to that in the offseason? Like, we see the relationship between the two players. We saw it in the summer. We're seeing it so far this season. I don't think it's out of the question that Raptors fans, like, we see, like, okay, a starting five change. The logical one is, okay, Gary Trent Jr. comes in for Dennis Schroeder. Scottie Barnes takes more of that ball handling lead role in terms of the offense. Dennis Schroeder comes and runs the second unit off the bench. That's the logical way Raptors fans see the easiest switch to the starting five, but that may not be the logical switch Darko Rajakovic is seeing. And what kind of scares me is what else he could be seeing. Like, if he wants to bring Gary Trent into starting five, well, does that mean Dennis Schroeder's coming out? Or does that mean maybe Pirtle is coming out? Does that mean somebody else, my goodness, is coming out of the starting five? So that's where I have a little bit of a scared feeling going into this decision about the change in the starting five. But ultimately, like, Gary Trent, like, can you really take out any of these guys from the starting five? Has Gary Trent really been knocking down the door to get into that starting five? And for me, it just hasn't really been the case. And as much as we want to see Scottie Barnes a point guard, like, I struggle to see those really working. Like, I struggle to see that playmaking really working, like the craftiness that Schroeder has. As much as perhaps I prefer if Dennis Schroeder was a bench point guard, we had a better one. I'm not sure shoehorning Scottie Barnes into that point guard role is the answer. I know he played as a point guard in college 100%, but the NBA is different. The NBA is different. And perhaps I need to see it more so to believe it, but I still feel like the best position for Scottie Barnes going forward is as a forward, is as a player who gets looks down low. I'm not quite sure of the lead point guard role where he doesn't have that relief of a ball handler. Like, Schroeder is a lead point guard, and he has that relief of Scottie Barnes running those sets. But it may shift towards Scottie Barnes, the lead ball handler, and Pascal Siakam shift towards running those sets with the ball in his hand. So I'm not convinced that's the answer. I'm not convinced, like, that's going to shake up this team and get this team on a winning streak or anything of the nature. So for Darko to be hesitant to make these changes, I think it's warranted. As much as, like, we'd like Dennis Schroeder to come off the bench, is that really better with the starting five by taking him out of it? I'm not quite convinced. I think that fans are just desperate for change, and understandably so. I'm not sure this is the right change to do so. I think that the bigger problems are going to continue to creep in with this team for the lack of space in the team will still have even after making this change, because now you have the lack of that shooting coming off the bench. So the overarching problems on the season are still going to be present even if you make this change. And I'm not sure if this is the right one for the players there. But hey, if the Raptors feel like they need to inject some spacing in the starting five, perhaps to get Gary Trent Jr. going, and that takes Dennis Schroeder to the starting five, that's not something I'm opposed to seeing. I want to see it to believe it. I'm not convinced it would work, but I'd be comfortable with a shakeup just to see how it goes, because what else do we have to lose at this point? We just won a game, but we're still 10-14 on the season. Things are looking bleak. Why not try something new and see if it sparks the team? So, what do you make of the roster? What do you make of these starting five? Should we change it? What changes would you make? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. That's all for me for today. Smash that like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe to Amateur Sports for more content like this. I'll see you again very soon for another video.